Lock of the Night listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, it's greatly appreciated. Just want to give you guys a quick heads up about my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/MMALOTN. Got a bunch of exclusive content up there, special locked-in episodes, specific prelim breakdowns, Hail Mary Patreon parlay, all my official bets, even when I'm charging the public, and then a Friday video or a day before event video that I drop just to discuss all of the type of line movements and any other spots that have caught my eye throughout fight week, as I normally record my Lockcast episode on Mondays. There's a lot of shit that happens throughout fight week, as we all know. So yeah, check it out, support your boy. Let's try to make this dream a reality. Now enjoy the episode. Welcome to episode 3 of Locked In. This week we're going to be going over Greg Hardy versus Alexander Volkov, which kind of came together in a short notice nature with Junior Dos Santos pulling out, and in steps Greg Hardy. You know, he's taken this fight on 22 days notice after he had that no contest with Ben Sassoli, which probably should have been a win. I don't know how much Inhaler Gate actually helped him out, but big balls on Greg Hardy to take such a dangerous fight on short notice in enemy territory, having to fly pretty much across the world just to get to Russia as well. Huge credit to him for accepting this fight and finally having his first real test in the UFC. You know, a lot of people were thinking that they were bringing him on a little bit too slowly, maybe getting the Bellator treatment, but I'm not mad at them. Like, the guy needs to get his experience in. He's 31 years old, pretty much starting MMA when he was 30 or 29. So not that much experience, but he's getting away with a lot just basically due to his size, his power, his athleticism, which is leaps and bounds above most of the guys in the heavyweight division, which is why he's managed to rack up an undefeated record pretty much. You know, say what you want about the Alan Crowder fight, but pretty much an undefeated record this entire time, in amateur where he went 3-0 and in pro now where he's 5-1. So Volkov was actually scheduled to fight Alistair Overeem way back in April, but he hasn't fought since then. He had to pull out, undisclosed reasons, not entirely sure exactly why. But before that, he had Derek Lewis back in October of 2018 at UFC 229, where he pretty much had this fight in the bag up until the last 15 or so seconds, where Derek Lewis decides to turn it on, catches Alexander Volkov, and puts his ass out. Very unfortunate loss for Volkov there, and also very unfortunate considering what happened after 229. You know, Derek Lewis was poised to come in and fight Daniel Cormier due to the fact that they were scrambling to find a main event for UFC 230, and in steps Derek Lewis to save the day against Daniel Cormier. So who knows, maybe that could have been Alexander Volkov stepping in instead, but I don't know if DC probably would have taken that fight. You know, obviously that's a much harder fight than Derek Lewis, and he obviously showed that, so maybe it would have been a little bit harder for Daniel Cormier to take such a threatening fight on short notice. But what could have been for Alexander Volkov, and I think the Overeem fight would have been great for him as well. A good test for him to see where he's at. But speaking about tests, this is Greg Hardy's first real test. I'm excited to see how he shows up. You know, last time he fought Ben Sassoli, he came out with a little bit more of a disciplined game plan, wanting to go the full 15 minutes and, you know, really feel out the cage. And I believe he showed improvements and he showed a little bit of discipline. But in this fight against Volkov, I think he's going to need to take a different approach. And I'll definitely get into that a little bit later into this episode. But super excited for this fight. It got bumped for the main event to the co-main event in place of Zabit Magomedsharipov and Calvin Kattar. But, you know, I'm not knocking them. Give Volkov and Greg Hardy that co-main spot. I'm excited to see whether Greg Hardy's going to be able to pass this test or not. Will he? Will he not? Who fucking knows? But I'm going to do my best to break it down for you guys and give you guys an educated prediction by the end of this episode. So thanks for checking it out. And I said this is the third episode, strictly because I had Calvin Gastelum versus Darren Till that you guys got last week. And then for my Patreon exclusive members, I dropped Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Vicente Luque, which pretty much went down to a T with how I explained it and how I broke it down. So I was happy with that. But there won't be a Patreon exclusive member of Locked In this week. It's just going to be Volkov and Hardy free for you guys on YouTube here. But Patreon members will get pay-per-view specific Locked In episodes that YouTubers just won't get. So hit your boy up on patreon.com/MMALOTN, support the movement, and allow me to bring you guys more content. I want to put more quality and time into this shit, considering the fact that your boy got a 40-hour job, but that's something for a different time. But let's get into this fucking matchup. All right, starting off with Alexander Volkov. We got a guy that's 30-7 with 20 knockouts and 3 submissions. He's a part of Strela team over in Moscow, Russia. No other real big talent out of there that at least I noticed from digging into the team. Maybe some guys that have been there in passing, but nobody that represents it, just like Alexander Volkov does. He's a brown belt in Kyokushin Karate and a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. He's also the former Bellator heavyweight champion and former M1 heavyweight champion. But speaking about Bellator, he won their heavyweight tournament twice when they were, strictly a tournament-based promotion when they were with Bjorn Rebny, if you guys remember that name. There's a little bit of a blast from the past for you guys. But he's also won the fight a night once against Stefan Struve. I believe that was a fight that took place in Holland. Great scrap between the two guys, and a fight that I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't actually bet Alexander Volkov there, and I'm pretty certain that the odds were pretty tight there. And then lastly, he had a performance of the night against Fabricio Verdum, another fight where he came in as an underdog. Not a lot of people expected him to win. And I believe Verdum has not fought since that fight either. So pretty decent resume, pretty extensive resume for Alexander Volkov as well. I think he's kind of a guy that's just been there and can definitely contend for the heavyweight strap as well. But I think he has a tough test in Greg Hardy in front of him. And if he gets past him, it's, he should probably get that Junior Dos Santos fight or something. But definitely has title aspirations. And I think he has more than enough talent to meet those aspirations. On the flip side, we got Greg Hardy, 5-1-1, 5 KOs, should be 6-0-1 or 6-1 actually, considering Inhalergate that just happened. But that last victory would have been by decision. Very impressive again for a guy as big as Greg Hardy and who's shown to be a little bit undisciplined in the past with his fights, kind of just going in there, rushing, trying to get the finish. But good performance last time against Ben Sassoli. He was 3-0 as an amateur as well, quickly bursting onto the pro scene and then eventually getting that UFC contract after the Contender Series. He's trained down at American Top Team. Great gym. I'm not sure how receptive most of the fighters are there with training with him, but he has the backing of Dean Thomas and Mike Brown, so it's on him. He's taken whatever tools they're giving him and he's using it pretty well. And lastly, he was a former NFL Pro Bowler, high level football player up until the point that he ran into the domestic abuse bullshit that's going on with him. I'm not going to get too deep into that shit. This is more of a technical show, a head-to-head show between their skill sets. So let's leave that gossip shit out of this. All right, so let's quickly take a look at the tail of the tape. The main things that stand out here is that they're actually the same age, considering the amount of experience that Volkov has here, 37 fights compared to the 7 that, or let's say 10 total, including Greg Hardy's amateur fights as well. Obviously both guys are at completely different levels when it comes to skills and type of experience that they've had, especially with Volkov's, extended experience over at M1, Bellator, and just pretty much all over the world. We're talking about 2 super huge or very big guys. Volkov starting at 6'7", and Greg Hardy starting at 6'5". This is going to be the first time I believe that Greg Hardy goes in there and fights somebody a lot bigger than him. Well, not super a lot, 2 inches taller than him, but I think that his size and, if you want to call it, square footage size of these guys, Greg Hardy is probably the bigger guy out there. 81-inch reach for Alexander Volkov going up against an 80-inch reach from Greg Hardy. Insane. I think that those physical statistics alone kind of close the gap in terms of the skill discrepancy, and obviously the athleticism and power of Greg Hardy makes that gap a little bit smaller in terms of, if you guys were to show me the statistics on these guys, like a UFC stats against stats, Volkov is going to be in the 90s, and then Greg Hardy will probably be in the lower 80s, upper 70s, but his power, his power and speed is probably going to be boosted to the max, so that probably closes the gap between these guys a little bit more. All right, let's get into actual statistics now. So 14 minutes and 59 seconds for Alexander Volkov is his average fight time. And this is statistics just for his UFC performances. So he's had 5 fights in the UFC. 2 of them have gone the full 15-minute 3-rounders. Whereas his other 3 fights have gone into the 3rd round, but have either finished in the 3rd round, his Stefan Struve fight and the Derek Lewis fight, or finished in the 4th round, like he did against Fabricio Verdum. So he may be averaging pretty much a decision per fight, per 3-round fight, but the realistic facts here are that he has gone to the distance twice out of 5 fights in the UFC. They just gone pretty fucking long. And then Greg Hardy on the other side, you're talking about a guy that's only had 7 minutes and 28 average fight time minutes in the UFC. And we know that his last fight was the only one to really go to a decision. I believe the Alan Crowder fight as well went to a 2nd round. But before that, he's just been starching dudes pretty much as quickly as possible. So I think his last fight against Ben Sassoli alters it or skews that line a little bit. I would like to see what it would have been if it was like a 2nd round finish for him against Sassoli. But 7 minutes and 28 seconds is what it's at right now. Alexander Volkov actually has 0.4 knockdowns per 15 minutes. He's more of a volume striker, not the craziest one-punch knockout type of guy, but he does a lot of damage. He holds his range well, and he's able to get knockdowns every now and then. Believe it or not, Greg Hardy actually has no knockdowns in the UFC. I had to go back and really look at that and confirm that, but most of the guys, they kind of just crumple rather than actually getting knocked down. Juan Adams actually went shot in for a takedown, and he got pounded out by Greg Hardy there. Even Dmitry Smolyakov, they kind of just crumbled rather than actually, get hit by a crazy punch and not fall down. Obviously, Smolyakov was eating some shots, but it wasn't really a knockdown. It was more of a, I give up, I'm going to roll over and just let him pound me out type of thing. So that's kind of, that really jumped out at me. But once you actually look at the fights, you'll see exactly what I mean. 6.28 significant strikes landed for Alexander Volkov compared to 3.88 for Greg Hardy. And in terms of absorbed, 3.35 for Alexander Volkov. So he has a pretty big discrepancy there, or advantage when it comes to outlanding and outpointing his opponents. And then we have 2.41 for strikes absorbed for Greg Hardy. One thing you also want to notice as well in the Alexander Volkov and Derek Lewis fight, he had a crazy strike differential there. One of the craziest comebacks. I think he had plus 82 strikes. So I definitely think that plays a huge advantage in that statistic, just like, Greg Hardy's decision victory has a huge effect on his fight time average. And then lastly, let's just look at takedowns real quick. 1.2 takedowns per 15 minutes for Alexander Volkov, whereas Greg Hardy, none, 0. Just squat. We kind of know what his game plan is. He just wants to keep it on the feet. 75% takedown accuracy by Alexander Volkov. He pretty much is able to get guys down at almost at will. 75% is pretty good. He also has a 75% defense rate. And then on the other side, we have 0% accuracy for Greg Hardy, as he hasn't landed a takedown, but he has a 66% takedown defense rate, which is okay considering he's kind of new to the UFC. But I think that's definitely going to be tested here against Alexander Volkov. But it's going to come down to, is Volkov going to be able to close the distance well enough before eating too many shots from a powerful Greg Hardy? So I think these stats tell us a little bit, but it's unfortunate that we don't have more statistics on Greg Hardy just due to the fact that we haven't seen him the most. He has 5 fights this year. This will be his 5th fight this year. So hopefully if he continues to remain active, we'll be able to, pinpoint some more, concrete facts and tendencies about this guy once we start to get some more statistics out about him. So let's dig into Alexander Volkov here. when we're looking at this fight, obviously we want to try to find somebody that replicates Greg Hardy as best as possible. And the only guy that really comes to mind is Derek Lewis. But even with Derek Lewis, he doesn't have the athleticism and speed of a Greg Hardy. Obviously, he kind of matches the punching power that a Greg Hardy has, but there isn't really anybody else that kind of matched that for him. So I was still looking for somebody with devastating knockout power, or even with decent enough striking. And Roy Nelson is there strictly for the power range or the power that he actually possesses. So I thought that he was an issue, or could be an issue for Alexander Volkov. And when digging into this fight, I saw a little bit of other parts of the game being answered, such as his takedown defense, and just seeing his takedowns challenged, as well as his execution of his range and his distance strikes. So let's start off with the first round with Alexander Volkov here. He initiates the clinch, or they're having a little bit of a clinch battle here between him and Nelson. And Nelson really wants to, try to get him down here. And one of the good things that he did was he got a beautiful trip here. So he actually was spinning Alexander Volkov on the side of his underhook, and then he's looking to get his right leg that you see right here. He's looking to wrap that around, his left leg. He's looking to wrap that around Alexander Volkov's right leg and then eventually take him on a little bit of a ride, and he gets him down in a beautiful trip there. One of the issues here, though, was his ability to keep him down. So what he really wanted to do was try to get Alexander Volkov's right leg out just so he could establish a better position, but he just wasn't able to. Alexander obviously was doing his best to try to get back to his feet. And one thing that we saw was that once he placed his foot kind of flat on the ground, Roy Nelson was going to have to look for another way to try to keep him down. So he has his arms clasped behind his back right now, but that's obviously not doing enough, as Volkov is still managing to get back to his feet. His feet are, again, once fully on the ground, his left foot, so he's able to stand right back up. But Roy Nelson is going to change up his method a little bit. So as Volkov is trying to get up, he's going to take his right hand, which you'll see right here. You can just see the glove part of it. He's going to wrap that around the ankle, the right ankle of Alexander Volkov. So when Volkov tries to get up, he has one of his pillars in his hand, and he sweeps him once again and gets him down. So beautiful work there for Roy Nelson getting that trip, and I think he won the first round strictly due off of takedowns and a little bit of damage. But moving on to the second round here, this is an instance where Roy Nelson kind of shows his cards in terms of how he wants to really close the distance. So what we're actually going to see is Roy Nelson go for a kick here. Let me pull that back a bit. So you'll see him go for his right leg kick. That's just to close the distance and get Alexander Volkov to kind of react to it, start moving backwards, and then he starts ducking down now. There we go. He starts ducking down now and coming down for the takedown here. He has Alexander Volkov pretty much backing straight up, which is good for him. And we see Volkov kind of correct those mistakes in the later half of this fight. But he gets Alexander Volkov against the cage, clasps his hands behind his butt. But Volkov's doing a great job by pushing up on his head and then getting that underhook on the left side and pulling up and jacking that up as much as possible to make it a little bit harder for Roy Nelson to actually get this fight to the ground. So great job pulling him up. Sprawls out, eventually gets him to detach his hands from behind his back, and he pushes him off there. So great work from Volkov, learning from his mistakes, I guess you can say. And we see him continuously do that. And then he obviously makes Roy Nelson pay for with a jab on the exit here. So, not the most successful takedown attempt here for Roy Nelson, but we see Alexander Volkov have a lot of success with that there. And then I believe the next thing that I wanted to show you guys, let's see here. Yeah, so let's see. All right, so in the third round, here's another entry where Roy Nelson goes for his leg kick to try to close the distance. They're really close at this point too, and he's near the end of the cage or near the cage wall. Goes for the kick, and then eventually goes straight for the takedown. And Alexander Volkov already knows this is coming, so he pushes off a little bit, but turns the corner as well, which makes it a lot easier for him to actually defend this takedown. All the momentum of Roy Nelson is still going straight forward, while Volkov is turning the corner and pushing off, and also makes Roy Nelson pay for it here with some beautiful shots. Really making Roy Nelson know that if you want to come in with those sloppy shots, I'm going to make you pay with an elbow and some beautiful shots. So here's another instance where we actually the only instance that I'm showing off in this fight is Alexander Volkov's ability to maintain distance with his jab and especially with his kicks. He has a great kicking game, and when he feels like he's not being threatened with takedowns anymore, that's where he kind of starts to throw out a little bit more, I should say. So here with Roy Nelson, we're going to see him flash his right head kick, I believe it is. Let's get that. Come on, load for me. There we go. So he throws that leg kick out there, and this is kind of just to keep Roy Nelson, on the outside. And one thing I want you to notice is kind of the time during this as well. He's, doing all this within mere seconds. There's another jab. He's going to continuously keep throwing these shots out there, and all while moving backwards, because Roy Nelson kind of wants to move forward, try to make this as hard of a fight for Volkov as possible. But Volkov's just doing great with throwing the shots and keeping him on the outside, and then doing a good job of circling off the cage now, where Roy Nelson's not able to actually implement any type of takedown or have a takedown entry as an option. So Volkov does a great job there. I'm very impressed with him in that aspect, and especially with understanding and reading what his opponent is doing and kind of the techniques that they might be spamming. And he does a great job of adjusting there. And he had a good performance against Roy Nelson. It was his second fight in the UFC. Came off a tough split decision over Timothy Johnson last time out, and this was his first time against like a decent household name in the UFC, and it was only on to bigger and better things from him after this. After Roy Nelson, Alexander Volkov goes out there and finishes Stefan Struve as well. I didn't really want to show too much from that fight, just due to the fact that I don't think that there's anything that we can really take from that fight that we can kind of translate over to the Greg Hardy side of things. But in the Fabricio Verdum fight, there was a lot of Verdum trying to take this fight to the ground, doing a lot of his flopping as well. He knew his biggest advantage here was to get Volkov to the ground, and he did a lot of good things in the first two rounds to try to get Volkov down, and he was successful, but we all know how that fight ends. But we're going to start off in the first round here. Something that I wanted to show you guys was a cool little sweep that Volkov actually pulled off on Verdum, and I was kind of surprised of this, like, being able to pull it off on Verdum out of all people. So let's take a look at this. Verdum has top position with Alexander Volkov's head against the cage, having a lot of issues trying to get out of there. And then at a certain point, Verdum gets on the balls of his feet. He makes it, it's hard to break that length and try to get in on Volkov and actually do some damage, because his legs are so long and his torso is so long that a lot of these guys have issues actually reaching Volkov's head. So Verdum was obviously showing signs that he wasn't having the best, he did land a good elbow in the second round, but that cut up Volkov, but it wasn't anything that was detrimental to Volkov and actually made him lose. So getting back to this scenario here, Verdum gets his way back to his feet, and this is where Volkov actually pulls off a tripod sweep. Beautiful work. So the first thing is you see Volkov's left hand here trying to get the grip on Verdum's right ankle. So that's pretty much the start of it. And then once he gets his feet in position, he wraps his left leg. You can see his left knee here around the right leg of Verdum, and also the instep. He's trying to get onto the thigh or the inner thigh of Verdum here, and trying to kind of like push Verdum's left leg back while he's using the grip he has here on the ankle to get Verdum off of balance, which he is successful in doing here. And then he eventually gets his way back to his feet beautiful work there from Volkov. I was very impressed to see that from him. He lands a little bit of a knee there as well, and then flurries a bit on Verdum here to make him pay for that. It seemed like Verdum was having a lot of trouble doing good damage while on top of Verdum from Volkov. He pretty much got the takedown within the first 30 seconds or so, but was not able to do any significant damage. Yeah, he landed a lot of good shots on Verdum there. And then later in the round, Verdum pulls off another pretty sneaky takedown. So he goes in for the single here. Beautiful. He has Volkov working on that. And in that meantime, he goes for the inside trip. So he gets his left leg on the inside of Volkov's legs, wraps it around the right leg of Volkov, and just follows through and gets Volkov down. Beautiful sweep. I was very impressed to see that from Verdum. Moving on to the second round now. They kind of start taunting each other for going for the takedown. Volkov's kind of like, "Hey, come here. Come get my leg. I'm going to give it to you." So he actually goes for a jab here while he steps forward, and that's kind of Verdum's sign to change levels, go down for the takedown. But Volkov does a good job of this time keeping his foot as safe as possible. Verdum tries to go for the outside trip this time. He's kind of gets him down, and he has the leg kind of wrapped up. But Volkov's doing a good job of getting an angle on him, having the overhook here to control the position a bit. Then he eventually gets back up to his feet and makes gets Verdum with a nice little uppercut after eating a knee from Verdum, and eventually getting his better cage position and getting Verdum's back against the cage. The rest of the fight was mainly just Verdum trying to get Volkov down, and then whenever Volkov got back up, he would on numerous occasions grab any of the leg kicks that Verdum was throwing out there and just tossing him to the ground. It seemed like Verdum was really starting to suck wind come that third round, and that's where Volkov was able to take over. He had a lot of success on the feet, landing his shots from range. Verdum was doing a lot of that, just this type of defense where Volkov is able to land from the sides, land the uppercuts. He did a lot of good work there. And then eventually he landed a nice combo to put Verdum on his butt and then get the finish via strikes. That's been the issue with Verdum and Verdum and Nelson in these fights, where they start to suck wind, and Volkov's cardio ends up reigning supreme, and he's able to get the victory or get the decision in against Nelson in the second and third round. And then in this fight, he pulls he pulls it off by getting the victory in the fourth round. So cardio is definitely something that's on Volkov's side here. It's a 3-round fight. Greg Hardy went 3 rounds last time, but it was his only time. But I think he's going to have a little bit harder of a time dealing with the gas tank of Volkov here if he gets, past the 1.5 mark. All right, let's get to Alexander Volkov's last fight now. This was back at UFC 229, the Conor versus Khabib card, huge card, big stage, and Volkov's been all around the world, so I didn't really get to him. However, we all know the dramatic ending of this fight, but let's get through it little by little and see where Alexander Volkov was able to nullify Derek Lewis's punching power for 14 minutes and 50-something seconds. But he had a lot of success implementing his range, his distance strikes. He didn't have too much trouble keeping that distance, and he wasn't really in too much trouble in this entire fight up until the ending, where Derek Lewis makes his crazy comeback. So one thing that I really want to show off in this for this fight are the distance strikes, are his kicks, are his combinations. And it's just crisp. He has super precise striking, which really helps him implement his range even better. And then he finds angles and openings on these guys through their guard that just, some of them won't even see coming from whether it's in between with an uppercut or just around their guard as well with a hook. So let's start off pretty much right at the beginning of the first round, 1 minute in. We see an instance where Derek Lewis is backing up. Alexander Volkov throws his power kick here. There we go. And then he follows it up with the beautiful left hand right down the middle, catches Lewis right on the chin there, backs him up a little bit, and then he throws a beautiful front kick teep right to the gut. I missed a frame here, but. He lands it perfectly to the body of Derek Lewis, and that kind of makes him crumple. You see him, kind of, just, fall um, react to it right there, and then he goes down. He doesn't really take a knee here, but Volkov is able to continuously pound on him, and then Derek Lewis somehow gets out of that. Moving on to the second round, similar situation where we get a beautiful combination from Alexander Volkov here. So he starts it off with his jab, which is, kind of grazing, and he comes over the top with the right, comes with another left. But the one thing that I want to show you guys here is his fucking uppercut. His rear uppercut is one of the craziest punches that he has and most precise as well. Apologies about that. Not sure what was going on there. But yeah, watch this uppercut that's about to come. You see it with his right hand, and he finds Derek Lewis's chin perfectly, makes him crumple even more after that. Insane. Here's another instance of it where he just follows his jab with a rear uppercut, and it lands dead smack on Derek Lewis. So let's see this. Here comes a jab. Kind of, gets pushed off by the forearms of Derek Lewis, but watch this beauty right uppercut that's about to come. It's going to be kind of blocked by the cage, but we know definitely that it lands. Here he comes. He's charging it up, and then just lands it perfectly. Stumbles Derek Lewis back, follows up with even more punches, and just, he outstruck the fuck out of Derek Lewis here. It was a ridiculous statistical comeback that Derek Lewis was able to make. And one of the crazier things to happen was obviously Joe Rogan drops this on us.
It's so fun to watch though, because you just don't know what's going to happen. You're exactly right.
And then Derek Lewis goes on and pulls this shit off. So we see here Derek Lewis, knowing he has less than, this is normally when he turns his burners on pretty much in every fight. Even this past one that he had with Blagoy Ivanov, he's always coming on strong in the last 30 seconds or so, and it's no different here. So Alexander Volkov was actually throwing this knee throughout the fight as well to try to maintain the distance. Just with his length and how tall he is, the knee normally lands perfectly on the stomach or the solar plexus of his opponents, and that kind of keeps them away, keeps their punches from falling short, keeps their punches falling short, and he's able to stay out of the way from these big shots. But it's kind of different here. So he lands her a little bit there. He stumbles Derek Lewis, and Derek Lewis 3 seconds later comes with a nice overhand right this time. And Volkov is throwing the knee here. Obviously, we can't really see the angle, but he is. Actually, you kind of see it. So it kind of like bounces off of Lewis's stomach, goes over to Lewis's right side, which is where he's throwing the punch. And Volkov kind of almost blocks his punch, so you can see his hand kind of in between his head and Derek Lewis's right hand that comes, but he still lands a beautiful shot right there. And here we go with another one. Throws the knee once again, and Derek Lewis just comes right down the pipe. Bang. Insane shot. And down goes Alexander Volkov, and we kind of know how that ends. I had a lock of the night play on Alexander Volkov there. Very disheartening to see it kind of lose like that. That one was really shitty. So that's definitely something that Alexander Volkov is going to be very wary about this time against Greg Hardy. Greg Hardy's a much bigger guy than Derek Lewis. He has just as much punching power, in my opinion, if Greg Hardy really commits himself. So I don't know if the lead knee is something that he's going to want to throw here. He's going to have to pick his shots and know really when to throw them, all while trying to escape any type of power shot that Greg Hardy is throwing his way. So Greg Hardy, I think he has the reach and the size to, even if he gets hit with that lead knee, to land a good shot on Alexander Volkov. But I believe that Volkov will be, trained and ready for that, and probably won't make the same mistake that he did here against Derek Lewis. I'm sure he's watched this over and over again. I'm sure his coaches have watched this over and over again. And there's a lot to take from this. This one simple mistake with 16 seconds left cost him pretty much the entire fight and possibly a title shot. Again, like I said at the top of the show, maybe he could have gotten a title shot with DC short notice, UFC 230 at MSG, but Derek Lewis ends up getting it and then losing to DC. But something for Volkov to think about and hopefully come back stronger. All right, now that we've assessed all the footage on Alexander Volkov and anything that I found to be useful, Let's make a bit of a pros and cons list, as I love to do. If you guys have seen the other episodes, you guys know I like to do this, as it allows us to really, see the keywords that allow these guys to be, advantageous in their fights, and then obviously the cons to see the flaws and things that they need to work on, and things that their opponents can kind of exploit as their weakness. So, getting into the pros, the first thing, obviously, with Alexander Volkov, 6'7", 81-inch reach, his size and reach is just a huge advantage in every fight that he has. Obviously in the Roy Nelson fight, it was a big advantage, and pretty much every fight that he has, he's always at an advantage. And he's going to have a slight advantage here against Greg Hardy, which I still think will, be helpful for him, but he just needs to be careful with when throwing his strikes, and Greg Hardy trying to close the distance and making sure that he's still maintaining that distance. On top of that size and reach, his precision striking. His hands are just amazing in terms of finding their targets, whether it's that beautiful uppercut that I was showing off in the Derek Lewis fight, or his hooks. His jab as well really allows him to establish his distance, which goes on into my next point, his distance striking. It's amazing as well. He really keeps opponents on the end of his punches, uses his kicks as well to, get back guys up. His front kick is vicious as well. He hurt Derek Lewis numerous times with that. His knee as well, if he's able to do it. I wouldn't suggest that he uses those lead knees in this fight against Greg Hardy, but when he is fighting guys that are a little bit smaller than him, it's definitely a huge advantage for him to do that. But yeah, teeps, front kicks, head kicks, all of his kicks allow him to maintain the distance and keep his opponent from, kind of stepping in and thinking twice about closing the distance. And lastly, or second last, I should say, his brown belt in jiu-jitsu, I don't think it's going to be a huge factor here. I could see him potentially going for a takedown and try to work that jiu-jitsu and try to get some sort of choke on Greg Hardy, who is probably green on the ground right now. But I'm assuming it's going to be very hard to keep Greg Hardy down just due to that guy's size. I'm assuming he's going to be way stronger than Volkov as well, so Volkov might have some issues there. But just his technique alone in jiu-jitsu, he was able to pretty much survive an entire round with Verdum on top of him. Verdum even had his back for a good chunk of time, and Volkov was able to get out of it. So if Verdum is not going to sub Volkov, Greg Hardy probably won't. He might, get top position and rain down some punches, but I expect Volkov to be, to be disciplined enough to get Greg Hardy out of that dominant position and get this fight back to the feet, or even go for a sweep and get on top of Greg Hardy himself. And then lastly, his experience. He has over 37 fights. He's been all around the world. He's seen it all. It's hard for me to see how he wilts under any type of exterior pressure, whether it's him fighting in Moscow or even the allure of fighting a guy with the name value per se of a Greg Hardy. All right, let's move on to the cons now. First and foremost, we got to be a little bit questionable about the status of his chin. So it's great that he's taken over 13 months off. We have no idea why he was forced to pull off that April fight where he was supposed to fight Alistair Overeem. But it can only be good for him to take that time off, recover from that Derek Lewis finish. He got put out pretty bad. It was kind of unfortunate to see, but we don't know the status of his chin here. We saw Wonderboy come back last week after that brutal knockout from Anthony Pettis, and he looked flawless. He got hit a couple times, but he was fine. But getting hit by Vicente Luque is different than getting hit by a Greg Hardy here. So I'm not sure if he's going to be able to withstand that power. If Greg Hardy is able to land cleanly on him, but that's definitely a con and something that you need to worry about if you want to put the money down on the juice of an Alexander Volkov line. Another thing is very experienced, but that fight IQ lapse of judgment that he had against Derek Lewis is kind of concerning. With that much time left, throwing that type of knee, it was successful for him in the last, earlier in that fight, but it still is a dangerous strike to throw if you're not able to land that knee perfectly and reassert that distance between you and your opponent. somebody with the heavy hands of a guy like Greg Hardy is probably going to land on you, and it's not going to be pretty. So he's going to have to tighten that up a little bit. I'm not saying he's the worst fight IQ fighter out there, but just to have that little bit of a gaff at such a high level, it's a little bit concerning. So he needs to be sure that he has his I's dotted and his T's crossed when it comes to making decisions inside the cage. One other kind of flaw that I saw in his game is sometimes he is getting back straight up. So whether it's going to be Greg Hardy pushing forward with punches or throwing a leg kick, Roy Nelson style, Alexander Volkov is going to need, we've seen it where he has kind of circled off the cage when he is being backed up. So he's going to need to kind of establish that from the get-go. Because I think if Greg Hardy gets him up against the cage, it's going to be hard for Volkov to get him off of him. Greg, again, Hardy's a huge guy. He may not be the most technical when it comes to the clinch or anything like that, but just having that size bear against you and pushing you up against the cage, it's not going to be nice. And that's probably where Greg Hardy's going to be able to land most of his damage as well too. So he's going to have to make sure that he doesn't back straight up. He's going to start have to circling as soon as he hits that warning track, just so Greg Hardy's not able to really push him against the cage and land bombs. And then lastly, this is kind of a lose-lose fight. I'm putting this in the cons just because, he doesn't really have much to gain out of this fight. If he goes out there and starches Greg Hardy, he's doing it as a minus 270, minus 275 favorite. It's kind of a foregone conclusion that he should go out there and mollywop this guy who's pretty green as a fighter, coming in for his 8th pro MMA fight. And then if he loses, you just lost to a guy that, was fighting cans a couple fights ago, and you've lost your ranking pretty much, and it's kind of tarnished a little bit of your UFC record as well, to have a loss to a guy like Greg Hardy. I don't think Greg Hardy's ever going to go out there and become a champion. Guys at that level are just a little bit too much, and I think that Volkov just being on that cusp of that top 5, top 7, if he loses this fight, it's not a good look. So he doesn't have much to gain from actually getting the victory other than, a paycheck and another W on his record. But in terms of losing it, it's going to be a tough road back. And I don't know if the UFC would, believe in him as much as they did before this fight. So couple cons, couple pros, but stylistically, I think he matches up well with Greg Hardy. But let's go and see what Greg Hardy has to offer and see if it can be offset. All right, now let's see what Greg Hardy is made of. He's had all of his UFC fights this year in 2019. This is going to be his 5th fight. He fought in January, April, one time in the summer. Then he just fought a couple weeks ago in Boston. And now here he is again coming in to fight Alexander Volkov on 22 days notice in Russia, of all places. So let's quickly go over his little UFC stint. Not most of his fights weren't that long. Obviously, the Alan Crowder fight went into the 2nd round, and then the Ben Sassoli fight was a decision in itself. So what I was trying to pick apart is what I saw in the first fight and how he's gradually progressed up until his last Ben Sassoli fight. And there are little bits of improvement that we'll be able to see here. But all in all, the guy's still relatively green. And to go up against a guy that's, had 35 plus fights like an Alexander Volkov, it's going to be very tough for Greg Hardy to pull off the victory here. But power always, changes the equation when it comes to experience and any other questions when it comes to fights. So let's start off with the Alan Crowder fight. Right off the bat, like this is pretty much the first exchange that he has in his UFC career. So let's take a look at it. He comes in pretty sloppy here. Comes in, I believe, with a hook, chin high up in the air. Alan Crowder comes over the top with the left hook and lands on him as well. Pretty big shot there. Hits him with the right as well. I believe he trips there. Greg Hardy follows up a little bit more. Just kind of sloppy, like right off the bat. What do you expect? His first UFC exchange pretty much has a lot of difficulty trying to find Alan Crowder's chin, kind of just throwing with everything that he has. Here's an instance where Alan Crowder finally gets the takedown, which makes things pretty interesting. So he goes in for the single leg on Greg Hardy's left leg. Greg Hardy pulls it back, but Hardy feels like this is the perfect time to throw, a knee, but he doesn't really have the best position in terms of his hands. No real clinch or Muay Thai plum or any collar tie type of, he just fucking, there he goes, throws his knee, lands decently. It seems not the hardest. It seems like he's just not the super close in terms of making that land to its maximum capacity, but still doesn't really have any type of control on Alan Crowder here. And Crowder is able to easily snatch up the leg and pushes Hardy all the way back, and then eventually takes his right leg, as we'll see right here, and he gets the inside trip on Greg Hardy, gets the inside position with his footing, trips Hardy and gets him down. Hardy was kind of lucky to, keep moving around, and he was lucky that he was close to the cage. He eventually uses the cage to get up and get out of that bad position, but it seemed like he had some difficulty. And if it wasn't for the cage, he'd have a little bit of trouble getting up, in my opinion. Let's move on to the Dmitry Smolyakov fight. Not a lot to show here. Smolyakov didn't really come here to fight. It just seemed like he came to grab a paycheck and get the fuck out. But the one thing I want to showcase from this fight is a little bit of improvement in Greg Hardy's game, and that's simply him feinting. We'll see here that he flashes his hip. There we go. He flashes the hip a little bit, doesn't even bring the foot off the ground, and it gets Smolyakov to completely trip out and bite on that flinch. It's crazy how much he flinched on that. And then Greg Hardy sees it and he goes for another one. Here's another one. And you see Smolyakov just kind of back up a bit, just completely shit scared of whatever Greg Hardy's going to be throwing at him. Great work in terms of implementing the feint game into Greg Hardy's game and allowing that to open up more opportunities for him to strike against these guys. And we obviously know how that Smolyakov fight went. Let's move on to the Juan Adams fight, a really quick fight as well, but he did show some good technique. I believe he's working with Steve Mocco down in at American Top Team, so he's getting a lot of good wrestling tips and pointers and help. So we'll see Juan Adams throw out the jab here, and I believe his whole intention was to follow up with the takedown. He has a great positioning here in terms of he might be able to trip Hardy here, but Hardy gets his foot out. He still snatches the single leg, but Hardy grabs on a whizzer real quick here, and he's able to use Juan Adams's momentum against him and kind of flip him onto his head. And then we all know how that fight pretty much played out as well. He ended up pounding out Juan Adams there because Juan just refused to move. Still protested the finish there. It's just nonsense. If you're getting hit with shots consecutively without moving or doing anything, the fight's going to get stopped. So decent little technique things that we've seen from Greg Hardy there. And then in the Ben Sisoli fight, we see him attempt to go a full 15 minutes. And yeah, he's able to go a full 15 minutes here, and he shows a lot of good things. The one thing that I want to show you here is his jab. He stuck behind the jab pretty much all fight. He was quick with it. Here we see him throw the jab out, land beautifully, and then get out of the way and slip. And Ben Sisoli just kind of throws his punch to the body here. One thing that Greg Hardy is going to have to be very careful about when he goes into this fight with Alexander Volkov is this type of defense is probably not going to work against a guy that's 6'7". He's going to find his hook. He's going to find an uppercut. He's going to find that range. So this is it's decent to see Greg Hardy do something like this to know, throw out your jab, but don't stay there. Try to get out of the way as much as possible. And later in this fight, we'll see him do it with his footwork as well. But this type of defense is going to be a no-no against Volkov, who's able to, close the distance and obviously just have that slight reach advantage. But it's gonna mean a lot when you have a guy that throws as precisely and accurate as a Alexander Volkov. Let's see another spot here. Greg Hardy throws out the jab and uses his footwork to go off to the left, which is away from Ben Sisoli's power hand, and he gets far enough and then eventually starts swinging back over to his right, which is Sisoli's power hand, but he's way out of range from Sisoli throwing anything. But just beautiful work in terms of landing this beautiful jab and getting out of the way without eating any shots. He's working a lot on his footwork, it seems like, so that's good. He has a lot of things that he needs to shore up still. Here's an instance where he has perfect timing. Probably could have had better defense with his hands, and obviously this guy, Ben Sisoli, is super short, so it's a little bit easier for him to get away with this, but he sees Sisoli charging. He sees the opening here as well where Sisoli has his hand down, and he launches that right hand, lands beautifully on Sisoli's temple here, it seems, and then gets out of the way. Sisoli's not able to land. he backs off into, or he angles off away from Ben Sassoli's power hand, and he's able to get out of the way and stay out of danger there. Here's another instance where we see a little bit of trickery from Greg Hardy, something I wasn't expecting to see, a year into his UFC career, but it's something small. Doesn't do the craziest amount of damage, but, it shows that he's really getting comfortable in there, which is a good sign for a guy that has the potential of a Greg Hardy in terms of his size, athleticism, and power. But to add these little things to his game, I think it's very good. So we'll see here. One thing that he's been doing a lot in this fight has been kicking the leg kicks and jabs. That was pretty much the game plan he had here. He wanted to go the full 15 minutes. He got the whole full 15 minutes, and there were some touch and go moments in that third round, but this was one of his highlights, I believe, where he kind of tricks Ben Sassoli here. So you'll see him change his gaze so he's looking at him pretty much dead in the eye, and then looks down, starts winding up with that leg kick, still kind of looking down, but just not the fastest with his kicks yet, nor does he have the complete dexterity with his leg kicks yet to really get a good head kick in my opinion. But he throws the head kick. Ben Sassoli kind of reads it, but just that little bit of trickery shows the amount of comfort level that Greg Hardy is starting to have inside the cage. So that can only be good for his confidence and for experience sake as well. And then we see the leg kick kind of just land to the body there. And he gets out of the way of Sassoli. I think that these small improvements that we see from Greg Hardy are very, very good for him, especially going into this fight against Alexander Volkov. I was very impressed with what he had to show in that Sassoli fight, and the fact that he made it a point to kind of go out there and make it a 15-minute fight to get that experience. Hats off to him. So let's make the pros and cons list for Greg Hardy after everything that we've just seen. Again, not the most amount of tape out there on him, or the most that we can take, but let's just get into the pros. So he has a lot of power. It's obvious. A lot of guys wilt under that power. The weird thing is he doesn't have a knockdown in the UFC. It's crazy, right? But in 4 fights he has no knockdowns, but he is just so intimidating with the power that a lot of guys just crumple under it. Juan Adams just succumbs to ground and pound from a shitty takedown attempt. Dmitry Smoliakov just didn't want to be there from the get-go. Alan Crowder ate some good shots, so I'll give him that. And then Ben Sassoli, that fight seemed to be more so Greg Hardy not putting the most on his punches, not looking for the kill, but the guy has power. He's obviously he has a lot of speed as well, which is why he was so successful with that jab and with those leg kicks without eating the most shots against Ben Sassoli. And I think we're going to see him kind of improve on that and continue to improve how he slips and pulls his punches and gets in and out on some of these guys. He's going to have a little bit of issues with Volkov being so big, but once he gets back to fighting, regular-ish sized heavyweights, I think we'll see that. His athleticism, obviously that's always going to be a pro. The guy was a high-level NFL player, and it's translating perfectly over to his MMA game. So, I think we're going to, that alone, that's not skill. That's just athleticism. It's just something that he's blessed with, and he's using it to a good extent in his MMA career so far. And one thing that we've seen from his fight with Alan Crowder all the way to Ben Sassoli a couple weeks ago, he's always improving. There's always something that a different wrinkle that we see to him, and the fact that he wants to continue to learn, and he doesn't care about getting that first round knockout, it seems, anymore. And except in this fight, I think he's really going to need to go for it against Alexander Volkov. But the fact that he made it a point to go the full 15 and make sure that he won, pretty much all 3 rounds, sticking behind the jab and throwing the leg kick out there, he's ever improving. I'm interested to see if we're going to see any type of improvement in these 22 days since he's been off. Maybe there are some things that he didn't show off in that Ben Sassoli fight that he mastered in that training camp itself. So I think that's something that we should look forward to. And then obviously just his size. The guy is a massive guy, 6'5", cuts to make the 265 limit. the guy is just massive. He's going to be a lot of trouble for for most of his opponents. And even though Volkov is a taller guy here, I think Greg Hardy just has the mass and strength on him. So that's going to be a huge pro for him in this fight, especially if he decides to engage in some of the clinching aspects of an MMA fight. But I think that's great for him. Moving on to the cons, he's relatively inexperienced. Volkov has close to 5 to 6 times the fights that Greg Hardy has. He's been fighting for way longer. It's it's going to be very tough for Greg Hardy to overcome that experience difference. Also, the level of competition. Ben Sassoli is the best guy Greg Hardy has fought, and Alexander Volkov would probably mop the floor with him. Volkov is high level especially for a heavyweight division that's kind of in its like dinosaur phase where most of the guys are a lot older. Alexander Volkov is still one of the guys that are the cream of the crop. So from going from Ben Sassoli all the way up to Alexander Volkov is a huge jump up for a guy who's only been in the UFC for a year and who has a total of 7 fights. A lot of his competition have been intimidated of him and pretty much have lost the fight even before they got into the cage. I don't think he's going to have that advantage here against an Alexander Volkov who's seen much scarier guys, much more talented guys. Alistair Overeem, besides Overeem's chin issues, that guy alone is a fucking intimidating beast in himself. So I don't think that he's going to be able to, psych out Volkov before this fight even starts. So I think that level of competition for Greg Hardy, that's definitely a con here. He's going to be playing the away team here. He's traveling overseas. The first time he's going to be fighting outside of the USA. It's got to play a factor into this. The jet lag, the time difference, the food. He's going to be cutting weight out there. He's going to have to keep track of his food, any and everything that a fighter that has to deal with, being on the away team and traveling halfway across the world. This is the first time he's ever going to do it, and he's doing it against a guy who's super skilled and super disciplined in Alexander Volkov. So he's going to have to be very, very careful and not take this lightly at all. And then lastly, I've kind of been saying it throughout throughout the episode. He's taking this fight on 22 days notice. He only fought, 3 or 4 weeks ago now. Let me do my math real quick. Roughly about 3 weeks ago. It was a Friday event. So it wasn't 21 days ago. It's going to be 22 days ago once he steps into the cage against Alexander Volkov. So short notice. He went a full 50 minute with Ben Sassoli as well. It's not like he just went in there, got the win and got out. But he didn't take the most damage in that fight either. So that's probably a little bit of a positive for him. But this is going to be a tough fight. So in terms of like how these guys match up, I see Volkov being a little bit more volume or throwing a little bit more volume than any of Greg Hardy's opponents have in the past, especially Ben Sassoli. The fact that fight went 15 minutes and Greg Hardy outstruck him the entire time, I think we're going to see Volkov be very successful with his leg kicks, with his teeps, really sucking it out of Greg Hardy. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see him go for a takedown and implement that brown belt in jiu-jitsu. I think that's an area of the fight where he has a significant advantage. And we've seen, Greg Hardy, he probably could explode and get back to his feet like a Derek Lewis type of fighter. But the only time we've seen him in a situation where he was on his back was the Alan Crowder fight, and he was kind of lucky that he had the cage right there to kind of climb off of with his feet and then push off of and eventually get to his feet. So it'll be an interesting wrinkle in this game if that's the route that Volkov tries to take, but he's going to have to be very, very careful when he's closing the distance, because I truly believe that American Top Team is smart and they know that Greg Hardy's probably not going to be able to go out there and Ben Sassoli this guy. He's going to have to go in there and take Volkov out. He's going to have to find that chin, hurt Volkov, take advantage of the fact that Volkov was put out in his last fight as well, and really put it on him. Volkov does like I've said before, Volkov does a decent job of maintaining his range, mainly his kicks. His jab is really good too, but he's going to have to be aware of the speed of Greg Hardy. So when he's throwing his jabs out there and looking for that uppercut, he does kind of leave his right hand low when he throws that jab and tries to follow it up with an uppercut. So he's going to have to be careful of what Greg Hardy is throwing in return. Skill for skill, Alexander Volkov dusts Greg Hardy. Let me say that first and foremost. Experience, skill, stand-up technique, discipline, almost everything Volkov has Greg Hardy beat. Greg Hardy's speed, power, and athleticism, sometimes it might be too much and it might just balance or put the scales more so in favor of Greg Hardy. So at the current lines of minus 260-ish, minus 270-ish for Volkov, it's kind of a pass for me. I was also thinking of playing Greg Hardy a little bit earlier this week. I think I'm ultimately going to pass on that too, because if Volkov gets on top and starts to implement his jiu-jitsu, I think it's going to be very hard for Greg Hardy to get up and get out of bad positions. However, if Greg Hardy catches him, I'm not sure if I trust Volkov's chin. Like I said earlier in this podcast, or in this episode, I keep calling it a podcast. It's more so an episode than a podcast. But like I said earlier, Volkov can be hit, and he was hit. And with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, like we saw at UFC 244, he was coming off a devastating knockout, but took some shots from Vicente Luque, never really got rocked, and never was super in trouble. So that could be the same thing here with Volkov. I don't feel comfortable putting him in a parlay though, nor do I feel comfortable playing him straight at the minus 260-ish range. It would have to take like a minus 170, minus 160-ish line for me to even bother playing any type of money on Alexander Volkov. But if you could get Greg Hardy up in like the plus 270, plus 280 range, I think is worth a little bit of a shot. He's currently around the plus 220-ish area around the time that I'm recording this, and it's kind of a pass for me at this point. I was highly considering playing Greg Hardy earlier this week. It's just not going to happen though. Unless I get like a plus 275 number on him, plus 300, I'm probably going to pass on this fight. But in terms of a prediction, with everything that I've just given you guys, I'm going to go with Greg Hardy by first round knockout. I think he finds the chin of Volkov. I think he catches Volkov on one of the counters, or especially with one like with his speed as well. I think he'll land on Volkov, put him down, and pound him out. But I'm not confident enough to actually bet on it. So taking everything that we've seen in this episode, ingest it how you guys please. But it really comes down to the line here for me, and I think it should for you as well. Minus 170-ish, minus 175 is a decent line for Volkov and something that I would possibly look at betting on. But it's just not anywhere near there, and I don't think it's going to get near there either. So this fight in total is a pass for me, unless we see Greg Hardy get up to plus 275. But in terms of giving you guys an official prediction, just like I did on the MMA Lockcast, I'm going to say Greg Hardy by first round KO. He's not going to, I hope he's not stupid enough to go in there and try to pull off a Ben Sisoli type performance. All right, thanks for checking out the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative enough for you, and you guys got enough from it to be able to make your own educated decision on this fight. Make sure you guys check out the Patreon. Every pay-per-view event, I'll be dropping a special locked-in episode on a different matchup, strictly for my Patreon subscribers. I got a bunch of other Patreon exclusive content that you guys can check out on the Patreon page, www.patreon.com/MMALOTN. Otherwise, you guys know where to find me on Twitter at MMALOTN, and the website is www.mmalotn.ca. Thanks for joining me, and that was Locked In on Alexander Volkov and Greg Hardy.